How are young women at one local university making a political difference locally and internationally? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. A survey this year by the Pew Research Center shows that in 2018, there will be more millennials, those born between 1980 and 2000, eligible to vote than baby boomers, people born between 1946 and 1964. However, voting records show that millennials aren't going to vote more heavily than boomers next year because young people simply don't vote that much. On this show, I'll talk with 3 Stanford students who believe that being involved in the political process is important, contrary to some of the statistics show about their generation. We'll discuss their views on political involvement and some of their thoughts about the state of our country's current political arena. Seated to my left is Hattie Jawandi. Hattie is a co-founder of the group Stanford Women in Politics, and she is a senior at Stanford majoring in economics. She said that she has long been fascinated by local politics. She has worked on policy issues for the mayor's office in Chicago, Illinois, and Stockton, California. After graduation, she hopes to continue working on policy at the local level. Shivani Pampati is also a co-founder at Stanford Women in Politics. Shivani is a senior at Stanford majoring in public policy and minoring in economics. She is interested in domestic policy from immigrant and employee rights to education and the legal system. She has interned for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice and the Research Department of the Democratic National Committee. She is currently the Policy and Research Director for Amy McGrath, a U.S. House candidate in Kentucky. Azucena Marquez is the current president of Stanford Women in Politics. She is a junior majoring in history and minoring in international relations. Passionate about refugee and immigrant rights, she has worked with an organization in France that helps integrate refugees into the community. She has also interned with an estate planning law firm in the Bay Area. After graduation, she plans to attend law school. Well, welcome to the show. It's a delight having the 3 of you here with me.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Now, I'm wondering, as students, how you've managed to do so much.
Well, Stanford finds a way to give us a fair amount of free time. You know, outside of classes, we're all looking for things to do, and because we were involved in high school, we were looking for a way to be as involved out here in California.
So when did you go to France?
I went last spring, April. I was there from the beginning of April to the middle of June. Yeah, so 10 weeks interning with an organization called Connexio. Yeah, I was mostly doing work to teach refugees how to code, but I wasn't doing any of the coding. Yeah, so to sort of find a way to integrate them into the economy and give them the skills necessary to feel like part of the country.
That's absolutely amazing. Now, Shivani, in terms of interning in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice and the Research Department of the Democratic National Committee. You weren't there when all of the emails were.
I was not there.
But you were there in the aftermath.
I was there in the aftermath.
And how was that?
It was interesting. I think there was a sense of coming back from that and a sense of trying to come together and move forward, because at the end of the day, when your personal life is kind of put out there without your permission, whether or not you said anything, it's a pretty jarring feeling. And it was a lot of the people we were working for. Hattie was with me at the DNC. This was when we went to Washington in the spring. And so that
Just
was
last
interesting.
spring.
Just last
Just
spring.
last spring.
So right after the leadership transitioned to Tom Perez, right
Yeah.
after those elections.
And the Department of Justice?
So that was during the Trump administration, which was interesting. But it was really cool because it seemed like there were still really good people because there's career lawyers and attorneys who work there. And I was working in the immigrant and employee rights section, and to see that they still did the same work and fought for the same laws was really inspiring. Despite whatever was happening in the news, they always kept going.
And did the U.S. Attorney General come by?
They had a what they called lunch and learns for all the interns, but I hadn't started then because we were on the quarter system, so I was later joining. And I heard that was a very interesting talk where
You missed it.
I missed it. Yeah, it was
So
pretty sad.
when Shivani and I were at the DNC, we spent a lot of time transcribing different people's speeches, and so we got to know Jeff Sessions very well. So
Very
it's
well.
sad that you missed him in the flesh.
Yeah.
Got to know him very well through his words.
His words.
Yes. So
got-
what did you think? No, go on. You
Oh, I
can
was going to say we got pretty good impressions, vocal impressions.
I mean, he's served his whole life in politics, and so he's a very practiced politician. And so we learned things about him going back to his career in Alabama as a U.S. attorney there, all the way to a Senate tenure, and now as Attorney General. And so he's changed a lot. And we
changed
learned
a lot. How?
Well, he has become, first of all, his focus has shifted. So he was, when he was U.S. Attorney, he had primarily a legal role, and then that shifted into a political role once he came to the U.S. Senate. But his focus very much remained on the courts. And so I personally watched a lot of transcripts of him on the Judiciary Committee and vetting nominees, and a lot of his experience there shone through, and some of his political leanings also shone through. He's often rails against what he calls unelected judges because sometimes he likes that judges can serve an entire term and never be tossed off the bench, and sometimes he doesn't like it, depending on whose side the judge is on.
Sure. No, it's. I did say we would get your views on the current political arena before we get too much more involved in that. How did you happen to start? The two of you were co-founders of Stanford Women in Politics. So how did you happen to start that?
It's a pretty funny story. So there was a third co-founder who wasn't able to be here. Her name's Kinsey. We're both from Kentucky together. We didn't know each other before Stanford. And it was our sophomore spring, and she called me. I was like sitting and eating dinner, and she was like, "Shivani." I was like, "Yes." And she was like, "Is there a political group for women?" And I was like, "I don't think so. Like there's like Stanford and Government and some other political organizations, but not one for women." And she was like, "We have to start this." And I was like, "We can't start this without Hattie." I was like, "There's one more person we need before we can get this off the ground." And that's when she was in Boston. So I called her, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait. Like when we get back, like we have to do all of these things."
Sure. Now you were in Boston, and what year was this?
This was late
Sophomore year?
2015, early
Right.
2016.
Before the election,
Before the
almost
election.
a year before the election, and
That's
you
right.
had taken a quarter off.
That's right.
To work with your mother's organization in
right.
Boston. See, I did my reading.
You did do your reading. Wow. So my mother runs an affordable housing advocacy organization called Engine 6, and we're from a city about 15 minutes outside Boston called Newton. And when I was in high school, my mother founded this organization, and I sort of followed what was going on in my hometown throughout my first year of college. And my mom was kind of on the front lines of trying to build affordable housing in an area where it's very difficult to build housing that's affordable. Housing was expensive, rents were rising.
Sounds like here.
Yeah, exactly. And so I took some time off to help her in that fight, and then I got the call from Shivani, and it was near the end of my time in Boston, and I was looking for another project, looking for a way to get involved once I was back on campus. And so I was all in.
So, Shivani, why was it important to start a women's group?
I think, so one thing at Stanford is that there's not a community, I would say, for people who are politically involved. There's a lot of events. We have a lot of speakers come, but at least for me, I didn't feel like I had a community or a group of people I could go back to. And I think something that's really important is having similar experiences and being able to share those experiences and grow. And so something we thought was really important is if I didn't have Hattie and Kinsey, I don't know if I would have been in politics continuing on through college. I could have easily been swayed for one way or the other. And so I think we really wanted a community of women because being a woman inherently makes it hard to enter politics. You can see the numbers of how few women there are in politics in general. And even in a progressive state like California, we don't have parity in our state legislature, and we're one of the most progressive states in the country. And so I think it's just important to be able to share those experiences and be able to talk to what obstacles younger kids are going to go through and how we get through them and how we push forward in a progressive and effective manner.
So, Azucena,
Yeah.
how did you get involved? And you're now the president of the group.
I am. So actually, my freshman year, I received an email from Hattie, Shivani, and Kinsey, saying that they wanted to start this organization, and there was an application. We sort of talked about what political interests he had, experience, all these really cool questions in my opinion. And then Hattie, Shivani, and Kinsey took the time to interview and get to know everyone who had applied and sort of select this group of girls who were also interested in politics and who would push forward this vision of a community of women interested in politics.
Yeah, this
No.
was in the early stages.
Now, I find it fascinating that you had an application process. Why didn't you just accept whoever it was who showed an interest?
So we do now. This was in the first few months of us starting, and what we were recruiting for was an executive board of women who were going to help us recruit, basically. And so this was sort of before we even became an official organization, before we had any money from the university or any membership. We were looking for people who were able to put in their 10 hours a week to help us out. And all those women eventually helped us become an official organization, and we accept anyone who shows interest now. So Azucena was one of the original members that helped us get us off the ground.
So this was really a serious business. This wasn't just a club. And you arranged it so that now you get money from the university.
That's right.
How do you do that? I mean, how is it categorized?
So the nice thing about Stanford is that we have a separate endowment for student organizations. And so if you have to go through a long process through part of the university called Student Activities and Leadership to become an official student organization. And once you get through that process, there's a lot of resources that you have that can help your group become incredibly successful. And one of the most important ones is money. So every spring, the entire student body votes on the budgets of every single student organization on campus. And so they voted on our budget. We applied for funding for the first time this past spring, and
What was your
overwhelmingly-
budget?
Our budget is
Pretty low
it's
comparatively.
It's yeah, I don't know the exact amount. It's over 10,000.
Yeah.
And the whole student body votes on it?
That's right.
So does that mean you have to petition, or you have to
That's right.
campaign
Yeah.
throughout the university?
That's right. Now the nice thing is, with a group called Stanford Women in Politics, most people, when they see the name, they're okay with giving us money. But we did have to petition and get enough signatures to get on the ballot. And then once
there
we got on
is
the
a
ballot,
formal ballot.
Yeah.
And what's listed on the ballot? All of the organizations?
all organizations, what they're requesting, if there's a percent increase in what they had in the prior year.
Their complete budget
yeah.
itemized.
Now, I would think you said that once people saw Stanford Women in Politics, I would almost think that might be a turnoff for some people. Like guys who might say, why is this just for women? Or this seems very exclusive at a time when we want to be more inclusive.
That's fair. I mean, I think that one of the things is in the first year, we were working really hard to get our name out there. So we had lots of events that are open to the public that were designed to raise our profile. So one of them was we invited Congresswoman Anna Eshoo to talk about, at the time, in Santa Clara County, Measure B was on the ballot, which was a transportation initiative. So she talked about that, and we got great turnout for that. We had an event with Ilyasa Shabazz, who's Malcolm X's daughter, and she spoke about race and religion in modern politics, and we had great turnout for that. So by the time the election came along,
Everything was out there.
Yeah. And I think also something that's really unique with Stanford is when you partner with organizations. So like we started partnering with a lot of organizations to put on those events, which then created a really good rapport for the kind of events we want, and the fact that we'll reach out to a lot of people and include a lot of organizations in our events, which then creates friendships, and people will be like, oh, they include us in this as well, because there's tons of organizations at Stanford. And so being able to collaborate with them creates a lot of more support for your group as well.
So, Azucena, how did everybody get all of this wisdom about how to organize and get people to buy into, you know, your ideas? And
you saw a lot of our
that's how they-
mistakes.
Yeah, speak to it.
You know a lot of the lessons learned.
It's great. A lot of it is going out and trying out an idea and seeing if it works out. And with all the dedication from a lot of members who are really passionate about this, I think that eventually, like, something ends up working out. Yes, there are some mistakes along the way, but I think we learned from them, and we've really improved a lot, and we really proved that we are passionate about this and that we want to really build a community of women who are interested in politics at Stanford.
So, in terms of mistakes, give us a few mistakes so that we can learn.
Yeah.
So we won't make the same.
No, I think that we talked a lot about this when when Shivani and Kinsey and I started the group. You know, we were kind of feeling in the dark. And then at the end of the year, when Azucena and the current vice president, Maddie, were elected, we thought a lot about, you know, what we wanted to pass on to them so that they could do a better job, and they already have done an infinitely better job than we did. And so many of them were things as simple as, when you first start recruiting members, have things for them to do. When we first started recruiting members, we knew that we wanted to build a community, and we knew that we wanted to bring them together, but we weren't quite sure what we wanted to do with them.
Or like the organization of our community, we were just like, join us,
Yeah.
please.
But we do that. Yeah.
But now it's kind of changed. We have like a professional development team, we have a community development team, and we have an education team, and we have clear goals as to what we want them to do per quarter and in the future, and that's
What
helped
does
a
a community development team do, and how many people on it? And
The community development team is primarily in charge of putting on events for all of our members to sort of bond and discuss politics or how their week was, sort of just talk about things that matter to them. These events are mostly like on the fun side, so they're really great.
We went on a hike.
Yeah, we went on a
once,
hike,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, we went
Yeah,
on a hike
foothills.
with picnic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
picnics on the Oval, those are great.
how
yeah.
many members? And it's free?
It is
It's
free.
totally
Free.
free.
How many members?
So on our core, we have a sort of a people who opted in to spending more time planning meetings
planning
and that
everything, yeah.
are on our core team. And on our core team, it's
30.
30. And then in terms of general membership, which are people who come to our events as they choose.
We're
It's
in
upwards of,
like 200, I think.
yeah, it's really high. Yeah,
Yeah.
About 200.
about 200.
Throughout the whole student body?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Now, is this partisan, nonpartisan?
Nonpartisan.
And you have speakers from different political
Yeah,
points of
that's right.
view? And do you ever get any backlash in terms of particular speakers? Or
Not yet. We haven't invited anyone that controversial yet.
Yeah.
So, and
I would think maybe you had mentioned what Malcolm X's story?
yeah,
Yeah.
Ilyasa Shabazz.
Some wouldn't see her as controversial.
No, I mean she was coming to act as a steward for her father's memory. She's just put out a memoir, but also she was mostly here to speak about race and religion and politics, and mostly to facilitate a discussion. And so we didn't see any backlash to that. In fact, she was so open and so warm, and she even had a separate event privately with students from the Muslim Student Union and from our group that she was very warmly received. Going forward, we might see some backlash, but so far people have been pretty relaxed about our events.
Yeah.
We also are a pretty young group, so
And
we'll
that
see where it
means,
goes.
yeah, for
yeah,
the group,
for the group. Yeah, we're a young group.
Now, I
only a couple
have
years.
some, I mentioned in my opening about the Pew Research Center and some of the center's statistics. But I also have that a lot of millennials aren't involved in politics, that they're interested in education, healthcare, and the economy, that some are conservative leaning than liberal, although another survey said that they are more or less independent.
Yeah.
And so they don't believe that they can trust government, although they do believe that they might have some impact. And millennials are one of the most ethnically diverse generations. So what's some of your feeling? Do some of those characteristics coincide with your experiences as millennials?
Part of the reason why we founded the group was because we were feeling the apathy of our age group. I think part of that is because people are so busy at Stanford focusing on their work and things like that, that it's as you mentioned in the beginning, it's tough to find time to show up to a rally or learn things about what's going on in local politics or attend meetings every week from Stanford Women in Politics.
And the meetings are every week?
Yes, they are every week.
Yeah.
You did
2
mention
every week.
10 hours a week? 2 every week?
Yes.
Yes.
If you're part of the core
Part
membership.
of core membership.
But the way that we conceived of the group is that if you're a core member, you're interested in doing some more of the drudge work. So that means planning the meetings, which means you have to put some more time in it. But if you're a general member, you sort of pick your own adventure. So if you feel like coming to a community development event and only have time to do something like that, which helps you meet other women who have similar interests as you, that's fine. If you want to come to everything ranging from our educational events, which are teach-ins, to professional development events, which are like networking events, then you can do that. So for core members, it is a time commitment. For general members, it's flexible.
So for core members, 10 hours a week or more, I would think you also have to be up to date on what all the other committees are doing. Do you?
Yeah.
So for Azucena and Maddie, and you can tell us because you know best, but it's probably
You
us,
know
it's a little bit-
best.
Yes, for us, it's for Maddie and me, who are the president and vice president. It's a little bit more because we also have to talk about things outside and make sure everything's sort of working. For core members, I would say now it's like 5 to 7 hours per week. Now that we're running a bit smoother, yeah.
It's almost like running an organization. It is an organization, but
Yeah.
a business, a corporation, right?
Yeah.
Well, student groups at Stanford call themselves organizations and
Yeah.
not clubs because, well, probably because
More
we take ourselves too
sophisticated,
seriously.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that you and Maddie do treat it that way. I
Yeah.
mean, they have the core meetings every week. They have the general meetings every week. They meet amongst themselves every week, and then when we've got a major event going on, they're working
constantly
together to make
talking,
sure that they're early, that they have the space reserved, that they have the money requested. So, I mean, I think during an event week, you guys are putting in way more than 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
So I could see the importance of having an application for the core members, right? You want to have people who are really
Committed.
dedicated to the cause.
Yeah.
Now, do you have people in your core membership who represent the different political parties?
So we don't ask because
We're
we-
completely nonpartisan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if we were to ask, then people could take it as we would choose based on which leaning they had. So we keep it completely anonymous.
Does it come out, and is there any conflict?
comes out a little bit. So actually, probably the most conflict was when we hosted the election watch party.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was definitely a lot of conflict. I think also there's a lot of girls who aren't So being from Kentucky, I think there's definitely a different perspective coming from a place that's surrounded by a lot of people who aren't necessarily my own political leaning. And I think there's a lot of girls like that who are coming from the Midwest or other areas. And
From
so,
red states.
from red
From red
states,
states.
where you have a different perspective, and sometimes that pushes back on a lot of people who grew up in a blue state or a really big blue city. And I think that creates not necessarily controversy, but progressive or like effective discussion, because then you have a difference in perspectives. Like I know numerous times Hattie and I have had debates which differ because I grew up in a small town in Hazard and she grew up in Boston, which are very different places, even if we have the same political leaning.
So what kind of debates have you had?
Mostly
Me and
like,
her.
Yes, one from Boston, another
remember-
from Kentucky.
when we were starting Stand for Women in Politics, we had, for our first meeting, we were going to do an activity where we would, we called it Beyond the Line, and there would be like a line that
Oh,
we'd do
yeah.
on the ground,
yeah.
and we'd read a statement like, I believe that the government subsidized efficient energy, renewable energy. And then you'd cross the line if you agree and not cross the line if you don't. And so the goal of that, then you would
Have a
discuss.
dialogue.
And the goal of that is to promote effective discussion. When we were coming up with the questions, we got into a lot of debates because I'm from blue Massachusetts. You know, we want to go green quickly, is particularly in the energy debate.
Yeah.
And Shivani has this perspective that, you
Yeah.
can rehash about what it's like to come from coal country.
yeah. Yeah. So like I grew up in a town where, I mean, I will say I loved Obama, but over the past 8 years we've gone green, right? And that means losing a lot of coal jobs. And the downside of that is no one was thinking about, well, what do we do instead? Like there's a massive group of people in the coal belt where they don't have jobs. And at the end of the day, they just want to provide for their family. And so they're not going to vote for someone else who's going to progress renewable energy but not do anything for them. So there was just no really way to move or have job growth or even have jobs, period. And my town was really severely affected by that. A lot of my friends' parents were really severely affected by that. So that's kind of clouded, or not clouded, it's made me think a lot more critically about how do we move towards green energy, but also employ a lot of these people who have lost their jobs now.
So how did that affect the question?
We kept it in there. I mean, so what we did was, so when we were having this cross the line event, I mean, after you cross the line and sort of say what your opinion is, you then you're allowed to then defend your opinion.
Yeah.
And Shivani and I both spoke up during the actual event about what our opinions were. And I think that part of what that did was it also let members know who were afraid that they wouldn't be able to say what they thought.
Right.
That really we welcome all points of view.
So I have a question in terms of that, and you might be helpful to us, Susaina. When it comes to coal mining and the pollution and the damage to the lungs and the soot that's in the air, people would rather hold on to jobs that are injurious to their health. Why not retraining for solar energy?
No, that's
Retraining
exactly
to these green jobs.
right. No, that's exactly what I mean. But there's no programs
takes
like
time.
that. There's
So why aren't there?
So,
it seems
yeah.
to me you
Yeah.
would instantly
yeah. So I
start
actually
creating these programs.
currently with my current job that I recently got, we are trying to do that. So she's running in Lexington, which is the second largest city in the state.
This is Amy McGrath.
Amy
Yes,
McGrath,
the
yeah,
candidate.
The candidate. She's really awesome. She's running in Lexington. And so we're trying to figure out ways, because most of Kentucky is pretty rural, and especially in that district besides the city of Lexington. So we're trying to figure out those exact questions. You know, how do we create job growth in a lot of these rural areas that once were filled with coal mines, and how do we retrain them? There's actually, I recently read an article in a county that's about 20 minutes from where I live. They're using, I think it's a California energy company and a coal mining industry, or a coal mining company, and they're partnering together to implement solar panels across Pikeville, this county.
So you have President Trump talking about keeping the coal mining jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
There's
How is that
actually-
going over?
I don't know. I mean,
Kentucky?
in Kentucky
Yeah.
specifically, I've seen different things in terms of what's happening. So recently, the EPA director came and talked, which I'm sure he got a lot of people there. But unless we show them a viable alternative, it's going to be hard to to do anything else. Because at this point, it's like no job or hope for a job.
So do you have those issues to deal with?
I'm from Illinois, northwest of Chicago, so very suburban. Yeah, I don't really see a lot of
And
these
let's
issues.
see, was that blue or was that red?
It was blue.
That was blue.
Yeah.
And voted more heavily for the Democrat
Yeah.
in 2016 than in 2012.
So
Yeah,
you
heavily
all have
Democrat.
managed to resolve differences in terms of opinions. And now we seem to be more divided than ever across the country. Given some of the work that you've done with Stanford Women in Business, do you have
Politics.
politics?
You're back.
Thinking two ideas at the same time. How would you transfer some of what you're doing? What ideas would you have for closing the divide?
I think a big part of it is just being open to discussion and learning about other people's experiences instead of being critical right away. Like if you're not even open to discussing and trying to understand where a person is coming from and how that person might have developed certain opinions, then you won't get anywhere.
Suppose you do understand, but you still don't agree. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think that disagreement is fine.
Yeah.
It's fine to disagree, and it's
As long
fine
as
to
it's
vote
an
for your
educated disagreement.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And it's fine to then voice those opinions at the ballot box.
Yes.
The issue that we've seen, and when we have these teach-ins every few weeks that we're trying to combat, is disengagement. It's fine to engage. It's fine to continue to disagree once you engage. But when you disengage entirely and you don't even know what the other people's opinions are, it just leads to spread. It leads to polarization, and
Yeah.
it means that you make straw men out of your opponent's arguments rather than actually understanding what they are.
So how do you, once you've engaged? I had a guest on my show said it's a matter of education. Presumably, when you're educated, you would have a liberal point of view. And so the idea is, well, you can be educated, not defining what education, what I mean by educated, and have a conservative view.
Liberal in terms of on the political spectrum, or liberal? Well,
I think Stanford and Washington showed us a lot about how you can be educated but be on an opposite spectrum than someone else. That's the program where you go to Washington for 10 weeks, and that's what me and Hattie did. And I think that was a really good program where you saw a pretty good divide in terms of political standing and being able to have a constructive and educated discussion. And a lot of it came from just differences in how you attack with policy, like how we actually think what is the most effective. Because at the end of the day, we can do as many quantitative measures as we want, but there's always humans, right? Humans are always involved, which creates variability, and then there's no way to say that this specific policy is the best. You can say with like, I think based on like whatever tests and studies, but I think there's definitely a way to be educated and disagree politically.
And where does that bring us? If you're educated and you disagree, how do you then come together in terms of policy?
Well, I think that there is lots of room for compromise.
Right?
Yeah. As long as you keep discussing, you don't necessarily have to agree, but you can learn from each other and come to a middle point.
Yeah.
Or not necessarily.
I mean,
Yes, go on.
tax reform, which is going on right now at the federal level, is a good example of a place where disagreement can lead to compromise. The current plan, obviously, it's been drafted by only one party, so there's not a lot of compromise, but there's lots of room for compromise within there, right? There's lots of things that Democrats hold dear, and lots of things that Republicans hold dear that could come together in the same bill. Republicans want to cut taxes, and Republicans want to particularly to cut taxes on corporations. And Democrats would rather have more revenue, raise taxes, and but there's areas of agreement within both of them. Both of them want to reduce the burden on the middle class. Both of them like certain deductions. You know, the mortgage interest deduction is broadly popular across both parties, for better or for worse. The the state and local tax pass-through is held dear by both parties for better or for worse. So, you know, things like that where ideologically you might be on opposite sides, but when you come together at the same table, you can put your heads together and come up with a plan that you both agree on, is what could come out of thoughtful
Yes.
disagreement.
Now, that assumes that it just kind of takes for granted that compromise in and of itself is the best way to go, that it's going to come up with something that's in the interest of everybody. And that might not necessarily be the case.
Yeah.
Because in compromising, you might very well lose something that is more in the interest of people to come up with an agreement for the sake of coming up with an agreement.
It's true. I mean, there are plenty of people who philosophically don't believe in half measures and believe that compromising means that you lose something fundamental. I think it depends on the issue. I think that on issues of fundamental rights, you can't really compromise.
Right.
So let's take that. Let's take an example. You were in France.
I was in France, yeah.
Yes, working on an issue of fundamental rights.
Yeah.
And many people right now are enacting legislation. I mean, European countries are turning some of them more to the right because of more and more people from Syria or more and more people.
refugees.
Yes, exactly. So where is the area of compromise, or should there be one? Fundamental human rights.
This is a very difficult issue, and having seen firsthand and having met a lot of the refugees who were there and seeing that they just wanted to have a better life and to really advance themselves and their family and get away from whatever they were running away from. It was difficult to see that, and I personally don't think you can compromise in an issue like that. But I do understand why. I do see the other side, and
Which is?
a lot of people don't know whether or not to trust refugees
Because of ISIS?
because of
and-
ISIS, terrorism, and all of that. But I don't think it's fair to judge them all that way. You could have a screening process, a quicker screening process that doesn't label them all as terrorists or anything else.
Does that? No, I'm sorry. Go on.
No, that was it.
Does that also go for the immigration policies right now in terms of banning people from about 6 different countries or 5 different countries?
I think that speaking personally, I think that all three of us are probably on the same page.
Yeah.
Taking off our SWIFT
swim
hats and
hats,
putting
yeah.
on our personal hats, we're all on the same page, being very much in support of immigration reform that protects young immigrants that are already here and provides a path to allow them
To
to stay.
citizenship.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
at the end of the day, also, as courts have shown, it wasn't a legal action as well. So that's
Yeah.
hard to say that it's even a choice where you compromise. It's just not constitutional at that
Exactly.
point.
Sure. Now, in terms of people coming into the country, you specifically talked about people who are already here. But what about people coming in from the other countries, refugees?
We already have a pretty extensive screening background. I think when I was studying this for a different thing, it takes about 2 years for refugees, especially the Syrian refugee crisis, to come here. And even then, we only take a handful of people who apply. And so in that case, I think that's as much compromising as you can do.
Right.
We're already
Yeah.
taking a very minimal amount of people
Right.
and screening them pretty effectively.
No.
yeah.
It's
Yes.
more about the education on that, because I
Yeah.
think
Sure.
what people think and peers sometimes think is that they don't know everything that's happening. So I think
Yeah.
if you talk to someone who probably knew more about what's happening and how long the process is and how extensive it is, they would be
How
less likely to
difficult it
push
is.
back. Yeah, and how difficult it is.
You were going to say?
Well, and if they knew that no refugee has ever committed a terrorist attack on American soil,
Yeah.
Right.
they would know that it's a bit of a red herring.
Yes, but how do you, and this Is it that the people who are supportive of Trump's policies in this regard don't know, that they don't understand?
Well, you would know better because you know way more Trump
you know.
supporters than I do.
In Kentucky, coming from Kentucky?
Yeah,
Coming
that's
from
right.
Kentucky. You know, I think, in my opinion, I think a lot of it goes back to fearful of the unknown. So I was one of, there are 350 kids in my class, or in my school. I was one of 72. I was the only Indian in my, in the grade, the only Indian in the grade for 2 or 3 years. There was a point where I was the only Indian kid, and there were no other Asians, no Latinos. It was white and maybe less than 10% black. And I think there is a fear of the unknown. I see how my school has kind of changed since there are no more Indians. I think that when I was there and able to talk to people and people got to know me on a personal level, it kind of removes this fear of the unknown. It's like, oh, this is a person whose parents are immigrants. This is a person who's not the same skin color. This is a person who's not the same religion. And look, I'm learning from her and I understand what's happening. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is just a lack of understanding and a personal connection. So when they make a personal connection to me, even though I'm not Muslim, I'm not a refugee, it's still one level of barrier taken down and a little more information on people who are not of the same walk of life, I guess. And I think that has been something really clear to me is I had a really large dance performance and it was really scary to do because it was traditional dance when I was
In
a
high
junior.
school?
In high
Yeah.
school, when I was a junior. And I remember right before I went on stage, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go to school tomorrow. And I was like, I have no idea what the reaction's gonna be. But the amount of positive reaction I had because so many people just learned about my culture that they wouldn't learn from the internet was amazing. People were just so thankful that I showed them a different culture that they would never be exposed to. And I think that increases education and decreases fearfulness. And I think fearfulness of the unknown is a really large issue to tackle when we're so polarized in terms of where we live.
Sure. Now, have you had similar experiences?
I come from a place that is majority white, I would say, but there are a lot of Latinos and a lot of blacks also. So I found that a lot of people were willing to have those conversations, and I'm Hispanic, Mexican. I never personally felt anything any discrimination or anything like that. So I think my school was really good about bringing in people of different cultures and making sure that we were all engaged and open to learning about each other and about our differences.
I came across an article from the Stanford Daily that talked about income inequality at Stanford. I don't know if you might have seen it. How more students come from households with incomes exceeding $630,000 per year than those who come from households earning below $65,000 a year.
I believe that came from a study by Dr. Raj Chetty from last year.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so the question is for this, it says, despite the expansion of financial aid in recent years, students represented in the lower income categories are still in the bottom quartiles. And ultimately, these trends have major implications for promoting social and economic mobility. What experiences, does that meet with your experience at Stanford? And when
sure.
you think of Stanford,
Yeah.
very Ivy League.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, Stanford is a place of privilege. I mean, it's
There's no other
impossible
way
to
around it,
deny.
Yeah.
And it can lead to alienation for those who come from areas of lower socioeconomic status who suddenly come to Stanford where it's expected that you have disposable income and it's expected that you can, do things that might be expensive. And also because, part of the reason why there's this this divide, why there's this obstacle to students of lower socioeconomic status backgrounds, despite the expansion of financial aid, is because one thing that gets you into Stanford is things like leadership experience or playing a sport. If you're the captain of the golf team, if you're the captain of the debate team,
Yeah.
and schools in distressed areas where budgets are being cut don't have those
have those
teams, or
opportunities.
students are focusing on going home and working and
Right,
supporting
yeah.
families, rather than making time for the golf team after
Yeah.
school. And so that leads to a selection effect that excludes them. And those differences carry on once you get to Stanford. Like, I was captain of my high school debate team, so I went and did debate at Stanford, and you have to try out to be on the debate team. And if you didn't have that experience, then you can't be part of that club. And so the obstacles still are there
continue,
once
yeah.
you get there.
Yeah.
And I guess that was part of why, when we created Stanford Women in Politics, we wanted a super low barrier to entry. It's like, you don't have to major in anything in particular.
Yeah.
You don't have to care about anything in particular. You don't have to pay any fees.
Yeah.
Just want
as
to
long
be
as
able
you're
to
interested.
engage.
Yeah. If you just want to hang out and talk to other women who care about what's going on in the world,
We're
even if you
here.
don't know anything,
Yeah.
it's
If you want to
super,
learn.
yeah.
So, what has been the reception? Did you attract the people that you wanted to attract?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been very lucky, and I think we came in at a time when there was a big need for an organization like this, like last year, the election year. So there was a lot of people wanted a place to come and talk about what was going on, and we came in and gave these people that space, and we've sort of grown a lot from then.
I think the one thing we're still kind of missing is mentorship from people who aren't necessarily our age. I mean, at the end of
Yeah.
the day, I'm a year older than Azucena, and to have more people be able to advise us and help us navigate this space is
Yeah.
a
Political
really
world,
big
yeah.
thing that we need moving forward.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Definitely.
So we're trying to connect more on the local level, but I think that that's probably the last piece, is that mentorship piece,
Mentorship,
and
right.
just getting involved more locally. So, yeah.
Networking events, anything in the local area.
So you've been trying to reach out to the whole student body, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking, how would you characterize that student body? We talked about it in terms of income inequality. What about politically?
I mean,
It's-
the student body is very
And
liberal.
very liberal.
Yeah.
We're in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's
Super
hard to.
The
I
Bay
mean,
Area.
Bay
Yeah.
Area.
So overwhelmingly, we're getting people who identify as Democrats.
Yeah.
But we're also getting, in terms of our general and core membership, people who identify as independent or Republican or neither, libertarian, what have you. But for sure, overwhelmingly liberal, and so it can be a bit of an echo chamber,
Yeah,
I would
Very
say.
much so, yeah.
And so I guess that's part of the reason why we invite speakers from across the spectrum, or people who are sort of not formally in politics but might be on the activist side of things or the organizing side of things, or even from local politics and local issues that tend to eschew the national platforms and sort of exist on their own plane, absent political parties, is to try and disrupt the echo chamber. And I mean, I wouldn't say that we've been totally successful yet. I think that, yeah.
So I would think we know what has happened with interrupting the echo chamber at Berkeley, for instance, how
Yeah.
that has gone over. So would you consider inviting some people at the far right, for instance, like the Republican students at Berkeley?
Well, first, that would probably take
That
a
would
long
take long.
conversation with our core membership.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that our goal is to make people feel welcome.
Yeah.
And so I think inviting a speaker that some of our members objected to, from the left or the right,
Yeah.
is probably not the right move. I don't know
Yeah.
if you and Maddie have talked about policy on this. But
There have been some thoughts, and we're thinking about staying away from anyone who any of our members might feel personally offended by. So anyone super far left or anyone super far right.
So in this way, by doing that, you really aren't that inclusive. Some would
I mean,
say,
I would say we're
that there are limits in terms of your inclusivity.
yeah, we're definitely exclusive of ideologies that promote hate. And that's a line that I think that
We're
all
all
of
on
our
the same
members
page
will
on
draw.
that. Yeah.
But I think there's
So,
a,
but you talk about understanding and understanding where these people come from. So are there barriers set or limits set in terms of the level of understanding? I mean, it's like understanding everybody, no?
Maybe personally, but I think as a group, I wouldn't
Yeah.
feel
Yes.
comfortable forcing that on our members.
because at the end
I-
of the day, it's also
it's-
student fees, and if our members don't want to participate in that, then I don't think it's fair to force their money to host these people, because everyone needs honorarium things. And I also think there's a difference between spending student fees on someone who is leaning right and has different views and different ways and policy ideas than someone who has hate speech and doesn't really have policy ideas.
You would invite a Jeff Sessions.
For sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Definitely.
You would invite the head of the EPA.
Sure.
Yeah.
yeah.
You would invite Trump because he's the president. However, those who say he represents
We probably
hate
couldn't get-
speech or
I'm not sure that we would invite anyone that high profile, given how expensive it would be. Yeah. But certainly, if Jeff
down the
Sessions
line.
wants to come talk to us, he's welcome.
Yeah.
So what do you foresee? You know, it's very interesting. I was reading that not that long ago, maybe in the 1980s, and that wasn't that long ago, within your lifetime, California was a red state that became a blue state.
Yeah.
And so I heard a professor saying recently that given time, there are more and more red states that will become blue states, just following California, given some of our issues. What do you foresee in terms of future elections, like 2018? And the election that has just been, that just happened. Any
Well,
trends?
I think we've learned first, and as the most recent election in Virginia showed us, that making predictions will make you look foolish. Because I don't think that anyone would have predicted that the control of the House of Delegates is going to be determined by recounts, given Democrats were down over 30 seats. So I think that Democrats like to say that demographics is destiny, and so a place like Texas is going to become a purple state because of immigration, or that a place like Georgia is going to become a purple state because of immigration. And I think it's really hard to say.
Yeah.
But you did have, what, maybe the very first person who had a sex change who was elected. You had someone who I think was a Sikh or who
Yeah,
was
it was New
elected.
Jersey.
Yeah.
And so there have been those breakthroughs.
Yeah, which is wonderful. We just
Yeah.
had a teach-in actually on LGBT
Women in
folks
politics.
involved in politics, and we said during the teach-in, this is only a couple weeks ago, that there we were talking about state legislatures and how there weren't any people who identified as trans serving, and 2 weeks later we have to revise that.
Yeah.
So things are moving quicker than we thought, and yet very slowly.
Yeah.
Since there's only one person now.
I definitely will say, I think there is, and even among my friends at Stanford who are kind of sometimes just trapped in the tech bubble, there is this like sense of I need to be involved, I need to be aware, and I don't know how that's going to affect things, but it feels like there's a sense of a lot more people who are more apathetic being like, I need to get involved, I need to do something, like
Definitely.
let's volunteer, let's get involved in an organization. I can't say which way that will turn the tables, but I think it'll have an impact.
I think politics is garnering a lot more attention, and I think that's good. Bringing it back to the beginning about how millennials are maybe not super interested. I think we're moving in the other direction, which is great to see.
Could it be because we're becoming a global village more and more, and what affects one part of our economy affects the rest of us?
Part of it might be globalization, and that was certainly one of the many popular explanations for what we saw in 2016 is that globalization spurred a backlash, and that led to the election of people who were anti-free trade and sort of wanted to become more isolated. But I think that part of what it is politics changed so fast between 2016 and 2017 that people our age are also starting to realize that it affects us. When things happen so slowly, sometimes you're not paying attention and you don't really realize what's going on, but when things happen really quickly,
It's hard to miss.
ignore.
Yeah.
So how does one, and within my lifetime, I've seen things change dramatically. How the pendulum always seems to swing. Whatever it is, the pendulum swings the next time in the next direction. And so now that we've had a conservative president, it seems that with his approval rating, the lowest of any elected president within that time range, that the pendulum is likely to swing again. Do you think? You
hard
talked
to
about
predict.
2016,
It's hard to predict,
2017.
but I hope.
If Virginia has anything to go by, maybe. We saw record turnout, well,
Yeah.
record as in the last decade turnout. We saw a huge tide that
Yeah.
may change who is in charge of the House of Delegates. So if Virginia has anything to go by, maybe. But it's hard to tell. Democrats were predicting that they would come close or win in the 5th District of Georgia, and they lost by a large margin.
Yeah.
Same thing happened in Montana, and there was the candidate there lost by a large margin. So I think that the only thing we've learned is that voters don't obey simple rules. And so and at the end of the day, it's about organizing. And so if one party organizes better leading up to the 2018 elections, and that includes you with Amy McGrath, then the tide will turn. And if they don't, then it won't. Yeah.
Organizing better around what?
Around
Because
getting involved.
everybody is organizing. Every party is organizing.
Right. I think getting people out there to vote and getting people inspired to vote, having candidates that inspire that within people and inspiring people to run. I mean, there's so many people who are running purely because of the outcomes of this election. And so just kind of garnering that support and gaining the energy and like channeling it in a way that makes people get out there is super important, and like being effective about that.
What's Amy organizing around?
What do you mean?
McGrath.
Aiming
'Cause-
like in terms of who she's aiming for, or like
No, I just mean
Issues.
if it's about organization and it's about trying to get people to rally around certain ideals,
I
what's
think
her strategy?
hers is right now economic development. That's huge in Kentucky. We really need it, and I think like the proposal we're working on and reaching out to community members. She does a lot of individual reaching out. Most of her contributions are individual. It's a lot about connecting with people.
So you talk about the organizing, and you talk about a lot of people getting involved and inspiring people. So we will see what happens in the future with the 2018 election. I'd certainly like to thank you for being here,
Thank you so
sitting at the
much.
table, sharing your ideas, and I'd like to thank you, the viewer, for watching. Until next time.